there's one passage in particular that intrigues me tremendously, and it's near the beginning of the story. It occurs uh, just before Felix is knocking on his old apartment door. I'm just going to read it real fast. He's thinking, Mama's voice, its teasing lilt, sounded so real. He shook off the memory and knocked. Firmly, but he hoped not arrogantly. He'd heard the stories. People killed for the crime of showing up unmurdered at the doorsteps of their family homes. And I get chills every time I read that passage, because it expresses what happened in a kind of oblique way, and just carries so much freight in those few words. I'd love to know how that came upon you, if it's you know, possible to think that way.
Yeah, I think that that has something to do with Felix's own consciousness and frame of mind and his way of thinking. He would know that these things had happened, that Jews had come back to their homes and been murdered just for like showing up. This is, this has been documented, and it was, I mean, horrible, horrible stories that happened after the war when Jews were coming back to Poland. There's, yeah, highly contentious to talk about in Poland now, but definitely documented. So I know that, and Felix would have known that, but it would be the kind of thing that he didn't want to focus on. He's trying to just put that out of his mind. Okay, bad things happen, but this is my life. This is my world. I've got to get on with it. But it's still there in the back of his head that something bad could happen to him, that if there's somebody inside who feels threatened by his showing up, that they could do something violent. So that's why he's got his rifle and he's holding on to it as he walks in. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to turn to some of the questions in the chat right now. And I know that we're actually nearing, I mean, there's just so much to say, Basia, so I feel like we're sort of nearing our end point. If anyone needs to leave at 1, we definitely understand, but we'll probably go a few minutes over just so we can get to more of these awesome questions. And I see that there's just a lot of interesting comments too. People observing that Felix in many ways seems to feel more like a Pole than a Jew, and also someone commenting that yes, the photograph really resonates with images that we're seeing out of Ukraine right now. So I just think, as you pointed out, it's just really kind of incredible in a bad way how much this history continues to repeat itself. Someone just wrote here, Linda, she wrote that the realist for me poignantly, and sorry, my chat is like large, I can't totally see it, and with appropriate complexity is a story. It seems to be a story of survival, a realist story of survival. Was this your vision of the story as you wrote it?
Well, so the Realist, it started actually, I started writing the Felix's son story first. So that sort of surreal, humorous story of a little Jewish boy being outed as a Jew in Poland in the 1950s and 60s. So, and as I wrote that, I kind of it brought up the question though, why was he raised this way? And it's like kind of going back, step back until I got to Felix and him coming back after the war. So that's where it started. And I mean, really, the question of whether Felix feels Polish or Jewish is a really interesting one. And I think that one thing that's really important in this about this moment in history in Poland is that it was the beginning of communism, and even for someone like Felix, who was not a card-carrying communist, and the novel explores why he's not, but he had a feeling that religion and these were outmoded ideas, and that we're entering this world like where like he believed in like Lenin's idea of the equality of all nations, and that if only he could, he didn't believe, he was an atheist as a child. I think the story talks about that. So why should he hold on to these kind of these rituals if they don't even really mean anything to him and they're causing problems? So it's kind of this very realistic, rational way of looking at this, at the situation. And, you know, in that time, nobody imagined that in 2022, people would be sitting around talking about, you know, is Felix Jewish or Polish? That was just going to go away. And of course, that didn't happen at all. It went, you know, so that's also what fascinated me, because there were these people who were so progressive and they had these ideals, these sort of socialist, communist ideals that that were really anti-religion, and that didn't work out for them. And it's quite tragic what happened to a lot of these people who really believe in communism in those times, and a lot of them were Jewish. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that this story does so well is just really showing the complexity of like dealing with different identities, and, you know, can you hold them all at the same time, or is that possible, or is it not, you know? And as you said, you know, it might seem to be, and then something happens where that sort of forces you maybe to take a side that you would not have, you know, naturally felt the need to take a side. Um, so someone else asked, which I think is a great question. They just want to hear about your short story writing process. How many drafts did you go through to get to the final version?
I mean, the collaboration with Paper Brigade was really great and also incredibly intense. I think we must have had like 15 drafts or more going back and forth between us, Becca, and Carol, I think. And I was the first time I'd ever worked with an editor that intensely. So that was really interesting. Before I sent it out, it would have been many drafts. So it is a lot. It's so much. It worries me because the novel is, you know, probably like 15 times longer. So to get there is, it's a lot of work. But yeah, it's fun work and it's great and it's very fulfilling work. So you do it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was a total pleasure to work with you. I can definitely say for all three of us, me, Carol, and Josh, it was just so much fun, and just learning about this you know, fascinating part of history, and this Felix's whole world was just so great and such a pleasure. So you know, we thank you for that. Um, One question, that something that also had intrigued us as we read it. So you note that Felix had not heard Yiddish since Palestine. I assume that he left to fight in Europe. Can you comment on this part of his life?
I was really interested in Anders' army, which is, it was an army, the Polish army that fought. The really interesting thing about them is they started in, they went east first. So they started in Soviet Union, Russia, and then they went like to Persia, and then they went all the way up around like around to they ended up in Palestine, and then they didn't end up in Palestine. They stopped in Palestine for a while. A lot of the Jews who were part of Anders' army left then, and they went to join that fight. And then Felix and some others went on to Italy, and they fought in Italy. And I'm not sure what, my grandfather was in the war. He was not part of Anders' army, but I thought this was just a better story than his story, that I wanted him to go to Italy for some reason. I don't remember why. I mean, some of the decisions were just, I can't remember why I made them, but I remember finding the book about Anders' army and being like, that is fascinating. Oh, and that there were like these Polish school children in India or in Persia. And even now, if you go, you can find like Polish cemeteries in those parts of the world. So I'm hoping that does come back a few times in the novel.
Yeah, and I think it's really just fascinating too, because it sort of highlights his devotion to Poland. Like, he's seen all these, you know, he mentions that he's seen all these like really stunning landscapes and these beautiful places, and he's had the chance in a way to settle somewhere else, but he really feels this, you know, strong devotion to Poland that, you know, has drawn him back despite the messiness that's, you know, he encounters there. So
And that's so, it's such a real thing. I mean, I know so many, there are famous Jewish Poles who just love Poland so much, and they write poetry and about Poland. And so that another thing that like a historical fact that I wanted to somehow incorporate, you know, this, like I was telling I was telling Becca the last time we met that one of the very famous Polish poets, not the most, but is a poet called Julian Tuwim, and he's famous to the extent that like every city has a street in his name. And I don't really know that most Polish people know that he was Jewish, and that a lot of his poetry referenced that, and his being Polish and Jewish, and trying to make sense of that. And this was, he also, right after the war, he was still alive, and he wrote about that. Most people know him today as a children's poet, and so all little kids at school learn Tuwim poems. My mother learned Tuwim poems as a child, and so to me, there's like, it's almost like this this Jewish whisper in every Polish person's ear, but they don't know it's a Jewish whisper, but it is. And there's a lot of examples of that. A lot of Jewish artists and filmmakers that people don't really, either they don't know they're Jewish, or if they do know, that it's almost like considered like an unsavory fact that you don't mention that they happen to be Jewish. But a lot of Polish culture is Jewish, so that also is something that I wanted to incorporate in the novel.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We only have a few minutes left. I know actually we're technically already over time. But first of all, people are very eager to, I'm just getting there's also just a lot of nice, very nice comments about how much people love this story, and also they're looking forward to reading the full novel. It's still, just to clarify, to people who asked, I believe it's still a work in progress. But so more details on its publication as they come, I believe. Basia, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to answer some of these questions in some kind of like, I don't know, like write out some answers of.
Perfect. If someone can save the chat, actually, we'll definitely try to do that. That'd be awesome. And I just want to say there's one last question, and I'd like Carol and Josh to jump in too. But Erica Dreyfus had asked, what was it that attracted us to this story? When we found it, and I think I honestly touched on a lot of what I loved about this story. Sort of as we were speaking, I think it does this incredible job of immersing us in this extremely vivid, beautifully evoked world that I, as a reader, am totally unfamiliar with. And I love reading stories that, illuminate a new world for me, a new setting, something that I am not familiar with. And I think that this is, not only really interesting, but also historically significant. And I'm also just really struck by Felix's relationships to his family and to the other characters. I think that there's so much raw emotion in, say, how he feels about the woman in the apartment or Leonid, that is a real mix of different emotions and different feelings that's very honest and that's very complex. And then, of course, you have this really interesting through line with the credenza and the photographs that sort of leaves on a very ends on a like symbolic but like weighty note that's just, I guess it's actually literal too in the piece, that the credenza is this weight, but it was really just a beautifully written and a beautifully thought out piece. So that was my initial reaction to what I loved about it. And Carol and Josh, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, that was really well put, Becca. I mean, just very quickly, as fiction editor, and Erica, thank you for that question. I think it's a great one. We see a lot of submissions that feel unsurprising, that feel like what you would expect. And when Basia's story came in, it completely upended the expected. A story about a Polish Jew who wants to stay in Poland after the Holocaust is a striking story. And what drew us in is just how believable it is almost, right away, as soon as you start reading. Becca talked about the world building here. I would just only add that Felix is a character, and I've talked about this in previous short story club meetings that we've had, the importance of characters who yearn, the importance of characters who want something. And Felix is struggling. He's searching for something. He's looking for those photographs that Basia mentioned of his family for a reason. He's trying to find, I think, a place in the world that is his. At the end, he says his duty was to stay, not just for his own good, but for Poland herself. What a beautiful idea. And we get to see his journey because he's a character of action. He goes to that house. And that's something else that we see a lot of stories sometimes where characters don't actually act. Really, they're more passive. Active characters who take risks like Felix does, I think, draw us in right away. We were really just so excited to be able to showcase this story and publish it in Paper Brigade.
So the only thing that I can add to both of your very articulate comments on the story is that now that I know how much of this came from family and how much you interviewed and revisited those interviews, I just have to commend you for being able to embody all of that research.
Thank you so much again, Basia. This was just fascinating, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you enjoyed this conversation and you'd like to read more of Paper Brigade, we're posting the link to purchase the double 2020-2021 issue and the discount code again. And as a special giveaway for Short Story Month, we're entering every person who buys a copy of Paper Brigade during the month of May for the chance to win JBC's newest tote bag, a set of National Jewish Book Awards greeting cards, and a copy of our limited edition Paper Brigade short. So if you don't already own a copy of every issue of Paper Brigade, now is definitely the perfect time to complete your set. I'd also like to encourage you to support us by becoming a JBC member. Our mission at Jewish Book Council is to educate and enrich the community through Jewish literature. We're a small nonprofit, and support from readers like you is crucial to our initiatives. The next meeting of Paper Brigade Short Story Club will be with Abigail Weaver, the author of The Little Bottles, on June 9th. You can find a link to register for that in the chat as well. It's our very last meeting of the year, so I really hope to see you all there. Thank you so much again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.